How's everything going in LA with the ongoing ICE invasion?
Yeah, it's crazy because the first couple weeks were, obviously, it's still horrific, but it's the like immediate like national attention has passed, which is weird because if you're not in those areas, it can almost feel like things are normal, but
Yeah.
they're really not, obviously. Like I have a couple friends who are in the like sort of like community organizing, like mutual aid space. And so they're still involved. And so I'm still hearing from them like every day stuff is happening.
Oh, yeah. It seems like you guys got to be the model for what they want to do all over.
Very much so. Yeah, I think I was sort of always expecting that. Honestly a little surprised it took until June, but we were always going to be ground zero for it.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, but it's going to be everywhere for worse.
Yes. Not for better.
Definitely not for better.
Well, good morning, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor of Lincoln Square. And joining me today is Keya Vakil. He is the vice president of political content for Courier Newsroom. And he is going to be talking with us about Courier Texas's ongoing reporting on the harrowing floods in Texas. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. Well, I think just to begin, can you just tell us a little bit about the flooding that started on July 4th in central
Yeah.
Texas and how this just became such a massive tragedy with it tearing through a summer camp? And I think at last count, I saw that there are 134 people dead and 101 still missing.
Yeah, that's the most recent numbers I've seen as well, which is, just incomprehensible to me. Yeah, so this tragedy happened in an area of Texas called Texas Hill Country. For anyone who hasn't been there, it's just this area that has essentially both like topographically and then the way residential and commercial areas have been built is just kind of built to flood. It always floods, but it doesn't flood like this. And there's a lot of different possible reasons for the intensity of this flood. Like, if you believe in science, probably climate change has something to do with it. But even leaving that aside, um, yeah, on July 4th, there was just a devastating amount of rain that led the Guadalupe River to essentially surge over its surface and flood. And the summer camp obviously is there's a lot of camps built. It's so close to that river, like I couldn't believe it when I actually saw it on the map. Um that it basically didn't stand a chance. And all of like Kirk County was the epicenter of this, and it's just been ravaged by the floods. And I if people are still missing at this point. At a certain point, unfortunately, they'll probably suspend rescue efforts. I don't know when, but the death toll will certainly keep rising, unfortunately. And these are small communities. It's not. Not that it's not devastating if it's a big city. I live in Los Angeles where we had wildfires that were horrific earlier this year. But,
Right.
small communities, everyone knows everyone. And, it just totally upends life in these sorts of places.
Right. So, like everyone, I've been following this story in mainstream outlets, and there's been some excellent reporting.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed in Courier Texas's coverage is that you've done such a good job in giving people practical information that they can use, like how you can file a claim for flood damage with your insurance company and how you can best donate to flood victims. So, can you talk to us a little bit about your Texas outlet, which I
Yeah.
know is fairly new, and Courier's approach to the news in it's 11 states that you're in, correct?
Yes, we are in 11 states, and Texas is our most recent launch. So we launched Texas last year, and we started just in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but now I've expanded into Houston, and we do some state ledge coverage as well in Austin. Our focus, outside of even natural disaster coverage is always a mix of, covering like local community content that like people want, like culture, things to do, and then like more heavy hitting political reporting. But we also really pride ourselves on service journalism, which is helping people get information they need or access resources they might not know about. And so, unfortunately from personal experience with situations like these, and some folks on our Houston team, and other places have been through disasters, one of the first things people are looking for is just how to do basic things like file an insurance claim or where to get food or where to stay if their home has been, destroyed. Um, you know, for those people affected, the politics of it don't matter at that moment. Like you're just trying to survive. And, you know, I went through this with the wildfires where I was looking for any basic information and X was completely useless. And
Right.
there was a whole app that we used called Watch Duty that was amazing. There's no similar app like that for floods that I'm aware of for the Texas folks. But we thought, okay, with our small team, which it is a small team, it's less than 10 people in Texas. We thought, okay, let's do as much as we can to just get people some of the most basic information. And then also, especially in those early days. And then as the days go on, we can dig more into the political failures or just what happened and why did it happen, and sort of more forward looking content. But, we always try to approach our coverage from like the hierarchy of human needs. Like, what do people need that day? And they needed support and help and resources.
Right. And you were mentioning X, and there's just so much misinformation that's out there, whether it's X or TikTok or any app. And there seems to be this kind of like tragedy vulture culture out there with people who are looking for clout and they don't care about people. And so I take it that that has influenced your approach in just giving people good, solid information that they can use to kind of counter that?
Definitely. We've definitely tried to prioritize as much as we can, obviously. You know, not amplifying that and pushing back on it. And the other thing we really saw in the early days was just this yeah, like tragedy, like vulture culture, but then also this like there was this like unfortunate like almost glee that some people exhibited that like a red state was being devastated. And I we live in a really difficult political moment. I can understand the like instinct that's in some way, but at the end of the day, like as one of my really talented colleagues in Dallas pointed out, like these are kids. Like kids didn't vote. Kids, these people don't like no one deserves tragedies, whether you're in California or Texas or Louisiana or Florida. Um, and X has just brought out it's never been like the best place for human nature, but it's absolutely brought out the worst of it since Elon took over. And whether it's conspiracy theories about weather seeding or taking glee in a red state suffering or just promoting all sorts of nonsense about FEMA, like it's whether it's now or 2 years ago, it's just been ground zero for terrible information.
Right. And sadly, if anyone did think, "Oh, well, I'll be safe because I voted for Trump or I'm in a red state," I mean, what we've seen during the first 6 months of Trump's presidency is that's absolutely not the case. Missouri, which is a blood red state, Arkansas, they've had, natural disasters and, Trump's administration hasn't done much to help them. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, who served under Trump, has been begging. Josh Hawley, who's, a senator from Missouri, extremely conservative, he was begging Kristi Noem when she was testifying before the Senate. So, everyone is being affected by these massive government cuts and, an administration that really isn't prioritizing anybody's welfare, whether you voted for Trump or not.
No, you have it. You nailed it. Exactly. I mean, this is an administration that just came in with a wrecking ball and started destroying everything in terms of state capacity. And, you don't really know when you need the government until you need the government. And a natural disaster is an instance where you really need it. And, you know, there've always been things that could be done better and failures, whether it was under Biden or Trump 1 or Obama, like things can always be better. Certainly, obviously, responses to natural disasters are imperfect just definitionally. But what they have done by coming in and just gutting national weather forecasting jobs and FEMA and getting rid of contractors and talking about just like eliminating FEMA and offloading disaster response to the states. All these things have ripple effects. And, I don't think it's possible to pinpoint what percentage of this floods disaster was FEMA's fault or Trump's fault, what percentage is climate change, what percentage is the local government and the state government, but it's all of it. And certainly, the buck has to stop somewhere. And, if you're the president of the United States and you're trying to pass the blame and get mad when reporters ask you questions, um, you're not willing to take responsibility. And we're going to see more of this. It's not as if natural disasters are going away. They're going to hit red and blue states alike. You're going to see more and more. I think the responses will arguably get worse as more people leave their federal jobs, because who would really want to stay under this sort of dynamic? Even if you stay, you can't really do your job properly. And we saw reporting from the New York Times that people couldn't get through to FEMA in the days after the flood because they fired phone call center respondents. And, you know, they might backtrack now because of the negative press and the pressure, and that it was a red state, but it's just it doesn't bode well for the future of disaster response.
Right. And like you said, we do have lots of natural disasters. We have, for for decades, for centuries, and we know with climate change that obviously the wildfires are getting worse. Hurricane season is more intense, flooding is more intense, and, it's even in areas that you wouldn't expect. Like, I spent 10 years living in Iowa City, Iowa, and they had, since I've left, I think, like, 2 or 3 hundred-year, 500-year floods. I mean, this is just the reality that we're living under, and, um the big difference to me seems to be how we're preparing for it and how we're responding for it, and that's what we count on our state and federal governments for. And there definitely does seem to be a difference, with the Trump administration and the way that they're responding to, um, these natural disasters. And frankly, we haven't even really gotten into the bad season because, um, it's not even August out west when wildfire season, really kicks off. Hurricane season, we're usually looking at like September, and so we know what's ahead. But it does seem to make a difference to have a government that wants to help versus, governments that think that there's too much fat in FEMA, we need to fire people, and it's not really our responsibility to respond. And that's my impression of what's going on with the Trump administration, but I know your reporters are on the ground, so they're seeing it firsthand. So, tell us what they're witnessing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of what you just described. There is this sort of, the Trump administration, Governor Greg Abbott, Representative Chip Roy, just pretty much Republicans up and down the federal state government ladder, all, insisting that there was nothing we could do differently. That this was like a crazy flood. No one ever saw so much rain, all the sorts of things Trump always says. And then rightly celebrating the heroic first responders, but then, insisting it's evil to ask a question about federal response or state response. And yeah, it's just indicative, our reporters are seeing it, other reporters are seeing it. There's just a lot of, I mean, there's a total lack of transparency. And there's a utter disinterest in not helping, but in expanding the government response and trying to figure out what went wrong so that it doesn't go wrong again. Every other day, we're seeing the New York Times or the Texas Tribune or a bunch of other great outlets break a story of something along the chain that broke and didn't function, whether it's the FEMA call centers, whether it's, there was something about the local officials not sending alerts early enough. This is an area with not great Wi-Fi and service, so it's trickier. But there's a lot of debate over like whether we need to install alarms that everyone can hear. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's a lot of just blame shifting and finger pointing. And, when it's all Republicans in power, the finger pointing tends to just go in a mythical direction of there's nothing to do. Like it's just the nature of the world. And yes, it rains, it floods, that does happen. But climate change is real. We are seeing, like you're saying, 1,000-year floods every couple years. We're seeing intense wildfires in the West every year that affects our summers where it's just smoky a lot of the time. We just saw unbelievable flooding in New York and New Jersey the other day where,
Right.
and so we're seeing, things that maybe happen every 10, 20 years happen every couple months in different places in this country. And that's not a coincidence. And instead of preparing for that and responding to that and having a plan to tackle disaster response or climate change. We're going the complete opposite direction. It's not that we're doing nothing. It's that we're taking steps to make it harder to respond and make sure that things get worse, whether it's, you know, disinvesting in clean energy, whether it's gutting FEMA and the National Weather Service, or just giving oil companies more money, giving polluters more money. It's all of it's trending in the wrong direction in the US.
Right. And in terms of the blame game, I mean, we've certainly seen last year when it was the Biden administration and um, there were the terrible floods in North Carolina and Tennessee, I believe. In the run up to the election, the Trump campaign had no problem blaming, Biden for everything. And there was a lot of misinformation that, FEMA was not doing anything or that they, weren't responding to red areas. And so, we've seen that the Trump administration has no problem playing politics and the blame game. It's just now that they're in charge, the rules seem to be different. And, I wonder about the impact on people on the ground. I would think this is very demoralizing to see when, you're facing such a tragedy. I mean, you have all these little girls who are lost at camp and you just keep hearing from the people who you might have voted for or at least here to keep you is supposed to keep you safe. They don't want to take any responsibility. I would think that that just adds another layer to the tragedy.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, I think it's devastating, both like the stories we're reading and some of the things our reporters are hearing and seeing. They're not based in Kirk County, but they're close. It's Texas is big, but they're a couple hours away. Also, a lot of the people who go to these camps are from Houston or from Dallas. And so it's a surprisingly small community. And so yeah, it has a real effect. People feel abandoned. People feel like the conspiracy theories are just making hay of the worst moment of their life. And we saw the same thing in North Carolina last year, as you were alluding to. Our North Carolina newsroom covered that for months, and yeah, it was a lot of people feeling both like really devastated and then, the FEMA conspiracies and all sorts of stuff that Trump used in the run up to the election was really cynical and has unfortunately turned people off of FEMA and just did the general concept of government aid. So it's this really unfortunate thing where they sow the seeds of conspiracy and distrust and then take a sledgehammer to government and then make the response even worse. And that's something the right has done for a very long time. It's not a new playbook, but yeah, on the ground, you have victims who don't know who to go to. They don't know if the state government responds. They don't know if the federal government responds. FEMA doesn't answer the phone. You have kids being treated like political footballs. You have local leaders saying the state didn't fund an alarm system, which is accurate. And then, they're saying their taxpayers don't want to pay for it. You have the state saying, hindsight's 2020, we'll do it now. Like it's
Mhm.
just a whole, and the people most affected are the ones in that town who just have no real help right now beyond like the bare minimum.
Right. Um, and I just have to think that with the response here, it just seems to breed more and more cynicism, about government and about just our ability to help one another because, most people, it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, if you're on the right, left, center, generally don't care about politics. People have a general idea that government doesn't work very well and it's not responsive. And I think Trump, has been very skilled at exploiting, that genuine feeling. But, when it comes to these big disasters, the American Red Cross and charities and churches, they're all pulling together, and just local folks. It's inspiring and it's helpful, but they just don't have the capacity that FEMA or your National Guard has to mobilize. And that's why, we have state and federal government. And when it doesn't work, it's just very apparent. And so, even if nobody likes paying taxes or, waiting at the DMV. When tragedy strikes, when there are fires or floods, this is the time you want government to work. And so, and I wonder, even if we're able to move on from the Trump administration, in 3.5 years, what are we left with institutions like the National Weather Service and with FEMA and with, climate research that's being devastated? How do you see us being able to rebuild from here?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question I think about a lot, and not just in the terms of disaster response, but I think as the best answer I have is I think it's going to take decades. Unfortunately, I think they're essentially trying to take uh, a wrecking ball to much of the 20th century and undo some of the New Deal and the Great Society and just the basic concept of government owing something to its constituents. And I think it's going to take a long time to recover from that. If you were a federal worker for 20 years and then got treated terribly and lost your job and your health care and who knows what else, why would you ever, even if Trump's gone, why would you ever trust another version of the US government? I don't know that I would in those situations. And that's just one example. We have to think about all the disinvestment, the prioritization of things that are, not related to fighting natural disasters or climate change. It's going to take decades. And I think to your point, we see in Texas, we've seen in North Carolina and Los Angeles earlier this year, the community response. People step up, like for their communities, they step up. Mutual aid has been very robust, but local groups, but they can't fill the shoes of government. Government is the only one with a real, in theory, if done well, to actually respond to people's needs on a mass scale with a disaster like this. And when that's not happening, it's just a really patchwork response. And instead of people recovering, they're just treading water and surviving. And obviously, that's on top of the people who died unnecessarily. And so it's a really, I know I'm sounding incredibly dour, but it's a dour topic because
Yes.
we there's a reason governments exist and respond and to things like this because no one person or no group of 20 people can do that. You need mass response. And Texas is not a small state. Texas could
No.
invest more in this sort of thing. The US is the most powerful, wealthiest country in the world. Instead of giving billionaires another tax cut and heirs and heiresses another tax cut, why not put that money to disaster response? We know why, but that's it's going to take decades because we have to both essentially rebuild the capacity that they're destroying, hire people who are willing to give it a chance, and then all the same while, emissions continue. So it's going to take a long time. I'm not hopeless that we'll do it. I think my hope is that by destroying it, they show just how important it is, and that maybe there is a more robust movement for a more robust, pro people government one day that's focused on actually servicing people's needs more than whatever they're trying to do now.
So I've been a journalist for almost 25 years, and I'm a huge fan of accountability journalism and the kind of
Yeah.
journalism that Courier does. But a trend that I've been noticing in a lot of reporting on Trump's second term, not just with the floods in Texas, um, but whether it's stories about inflation rising or government institutions failing in some way. Um, a missing element seems to be telling viewers why this is happening. It's just
Mm.
kind of like everything's terrible. And that fundamentally isn't terribly helpful because why? Why is a huge question for us to answer as journalists. And so you know, I I feel like, connecting the dots is part of what we do. Why is inflation rising when it wasn't supposed to be? Well, we have Trump's tariff policy. Trump has cut FEMA and put Kristi Noem in charge of, the institution under the gigantic Homeland Security Department, and she doesn't have the most qualifications to do a job of this serious nature. And so I'm curious on what your take is on why this seems to be missing from so many stories from mainstream outlets. Do you think that corporate media outlets are afraid of looking biased or upsetting Trump? Are there other things at work?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably a handful of outlets that are maybe a little nervous about being overly critical of Trump because
Mm.
their parent companies are either going through mergers or have been sued by Trump. I think that's
CBS, ABC.
exactly. I
Mhm.
think that is not, I think that's a factor in some areas. I think more broadly, honestly, I don't broadly think it's intentional. I think one of the problems is a lot of modern media will include that information, the cause and connecting the dots, but it's not till like a third of the way or halfway
Right.
into the story or
And
like
let's
into
be
the
honest,
video.
some people might not even read that far.
Most people, we have the data. Everyone has the data. Most people, well, one, if they're reading the article at all, they're reading a couple paragraphs. And so, or maybe just the headline on social media. Or if they're watching the video, they might not, I don't watch the whole thing of most videos. And so I understand it. So
But everyone should watch this one.
everyone should watch this one and all of Lincoln Squares, and all of Courier's. But
Right.
the problem is that information isn't coming. It's not emphasized high up enough or early enough. It'll say inflation rises in July or June. It won't say you have to click the story or watch 20 seconds into the video to get the information about the tariffs. And I don't think that's not inherently a terrible thing, but in the era of scrolling and everyone having 80 things pulling at their attention at every minute, you need to give the most important information immediately. And that is a journalistic failure, whether it's intentional or not. Um, so I think that's part of it. I also do think there is this general just like exhaustion in terms of how much Trump throws at people. And I think it can make for really good journalism in that there's a lot of scoops and a lot of things to reveal because everything's so nefarious and secretive. But I also think you kind of lose your eye on the ball of like cause and effect a little bit in terms of tariffs have been in and out of place for the last 6 months. So we were expecting inflation to go up in May and it didn't, and then it did in June. So I just think we live in this world of chaos where I think sometimes people are just so focused on chasing like the noisy story. Whereas like the story of like, oh, inflation tariffs, we knew this was coming, isn't as sexy. And so I
Mhm.
think it just doesn't get communicated or connected the dots well enough in a lot of cases. So I think it's all of this. I don't think it's like they're all scared or they're all bad at their jobs or any one thing. I think it's just a mix of a lot of things. And frankly, like media is just really understaffed. And so everyone's trying to do their best in an environment where it's impossible to do that.
Right. And, I know that that's one of the reasons why Career Newsroom came to be, and this need to have more independent journalism out there, whether it's Courier or Lincoln Square or Midas Touch or any of, these relatively newer outlets that, we're not owned by big corporations. We don't really care if Trump doesn't like us. We're just here to do our jobs. What do you see in terms of the future of independent media and the role that we have going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a hugely important role. I think we've seen Trump threaten, the broadcast licenses of more established networks. We've seen him sue them. We've seen them settle and cower in a lot of ways. We've seen, I'm blanking on the ABC News, Terry Moran, I want to say, who
Yeah,
was essentially not renewed from his contract because he said the truth about who Stephen Miller is. And so
and now he's on Substack
now
with
he's on
everybody
Substack.
else.
Yeah, and it's, there's a part of me that really longs for the days of a more cohesive, less fragmented media ecosystem. Um, but, that's not the world we live in. Fairness doctrine was repealed 30 some odd years ago. And so their independent media is, I think, really critical, whether it's, something like Courier or Lincoln Square or, something like ProPublica, which for my money does the best reporting of any outlet in the country, I think. And we're not beholden to stockholders. We're not beholden to a giant corporation whose film arm is going to merge with a different film company. We're smaller, we're scrappier, we do more, we work harder for probably less money. Um, and, I think without us, who the New York Times and the Post and all these outlets do really good work, but a lot of them, with some exceptions, have failed to adapt to the social media environment, to the newsletter environment. Not so, the Times has done that because they have more resources than anyone, but a lot of these other outlets, I don't know what CNN's digital arm is doing. I don't, they tried streaming and it failed. I think things like Substack, things like TikTok, like where, more creative, newer outlets are on, are really important because that's where most younger people are getting the news. It's where increasingly older people are starting to get their news. YouTube's a big deal. And so I think without us, all you have is the sort of both like influencer types who mean well but aren't journalists, and then the like right wing propagandists who just don't care. So I think we're critical.
I I agree. Obviously, we're, not objective, but I think, we do care so deeply
Yeah.
about getting good information out to people, about reaching folks who, let's face it, they're not weird like us. They're not political junkies, but they still need to know what's going on, with their
Yeah.
government because it affects all of us. And so, I think that it's just so critical to have independent journalism out there that's willing to take do the tough reporting and not worry about Trump being mean to them at the next press conference because there are things that are more important than that. So can you just tell us what's the best way for people to find couriers
Yeah.
reporting on social media and beyond?
Yeah, so and I saw a comment in the chat that was about local news being really important. I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's exactly right, and that's what we do. We focus on. We do have a national arm, but at the local level, we're in 11 states, and the best way to do that is just to go to couriernewsroom.com, and you can find the map of states we're in, and then navigate to those individual states. But they are really quickly: Texas, Arizona, Nevada, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Iowa, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, Virginia, North Carolina, Florida. I think I named them all. But
That's
go to
impressive that you did that off the top of your head.
I might have missed one, but I think I got them all. But yeah, just go to couriernewsroom.com. You can also search for us on, any of the social platforms, but the best way to get to our local outlets will be through that website.
Great. And pretty much any social media network you can imagine, I know you're there.
Mm.
You do a lot of, small, shorter videos, and it's great to see that kind of reporting, going beyond just your traditional stories and storytelling. So, looking forward to talking with more members of your team, and thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me.